goodbyes since I moved to England almost 15 years ago. Since that time, I haven't lived in the same home for more than 3 years, and only once was it more than 2 years. In that time, I've moved less than 15 years. I've moved 12 times, and I've become quite familiar with the cycles of endings and new beginnings. There's a certain frustration with that in many ways, but one in particular is as a gardener, because it takes a lot of time and energy to establish a garden, to improve the soil, to build raised beds and set up trellises, to plant trees and shrubs which won't bear fruit for several years after I've left. And so too it is with friendships. Good friendships take a long time to cultivate. And when you know you're only going to be leaving someplace, putting the energy into developing those friendships can be even harder. I think that's probably why my deepest friendships are with the people who I knew in my early teens and 20s before I began the nomadic phase of my life. But slowly, even when you know you're leaving in a few months or years, in each place, one finds those people who begin to mean a lot to you. And you begin to develop those attachments to a person and a place. Which means inevitably, you will one day have to say goodbye. This is the fate of every relationship. So when it comes time to leave, how do you say farewell? How do you express everything that someone has meant to you? How can you articulate the way someone helped you grow, inspired you, supported you, challenged you, comforted you? How do you find words for the inexpressible? And of course, that's assuming you even feel comfortable expressing those feelings. It takes vulnerability. It takes vulnerability not just to share with someone else what they've meant to you, but sometimes even to admit that to ourselves. So many of us are caught up in ideas of self-sufficiency, pretending, as in the Simon and Garfunkel song, "I am a rock, I am an island," that we often don't want to admit to ourselves how much someone means to us. Because to acknowledge that is to open ourselves up to pain or loss. And so we tell ourselves, well, it's 18 months, I can change their mind. It's hard to say goodbye. Because none of us are a rock. None of us are an island. We humans are social creatures, and our relationships with one another are a core part of who we are, of what it means to be human. And that means that there is a real grief that exists from having to say goodbye, leaving someone or something behind, to lose that relationship, or at least to see it significantly transformed. And all that that relationship has meant in your life. Of course, if you look at it from the opposite direction, how lucky to have had something that makes saying goodbye so hard. And it's not just people we say goodbye to. How do you say goodbye to a place, to a house, maybe one that you grew up in, or your children grew up in, or a city, to thank it for all it has meant to you, all of the milestones, the events in your life that it has been home to. There's this beautiful song by the artist St. Vincent, who also happens to be a UU, but is an amazing artist regardless of that. It's called New York. And it's about what it's like to leave a place, to leave people and have people leave, and how all of that transforms our relationships. New York isn't New York without you, love. So far and a few blocks to be so low. And if I call you from First Avenue, well, you're the only other sucker in the city who can handle me. New York isn't New York without you, love. Too few of our old crew left on Astor. So if I trade our hood for some Hollywood, well, you're the only other sucker in the city who'd forgive me. That's a haunting song for me, a beautiful song, a testament to what people and places can mean to us. How central they are to who we are, to our experience of a place. And of course, goodbyes and endings aren't just about moving. There are lots of endings in our lives, both small and large. Death, as we explored last Sunday, is one of the biggest. That one leaves. That's an ending that, it's hard to see that new beginning, although it is still there. One of the most dramatic shifts we can have in our life. And then there are smaller ones, like the transition from one grade to the next, from one school to the next, of having to make new friends and get to know new teachers, or graduating high school or college and entering the workforce, and that total shift of a way of life. And then there's when we leave a job. And that can be a big one, because for some of us, so much of our sense of identity, of who we are, can be caught up in our profession. From our 20s into our 60s, it's what we spent almost half of our waking life doing. And sometimes our work communities can feel like a sort of family. Perhaps a dysfunctional family, but a family nonetheless. And of course, that ending, as with all endings, is that ending is its own beginning. Whether it's starting a new job, or looking for a new job, or the beginning of retirement. That's a big one. An opportunity to redefine oneself yet again, to not find new purpose in life, to make new meaning. And I think that's incredibly important for people who have retired. I don't know, I haven't done it, but that's the sense that I get. That's what I hear. Is how critical, and for your mental health and your physical health even, to find that new purpose and meaning in your life. And maybe it's getting involved in a justice cause. Maybe it's getting together with the same friends to play mahjong every week. Maybe it's watching grandchildren, or taking up painting, or photography, or music, volunteering in the community, or maybe it's packing up everything and traveling around the country in an RV. Something to give our lives a sense of meaning and purpose. And sometimes endings may be something that we're actually really ready to end. We have relationships we just outgrow, where we've maybe headed in different directions in life, different priorities, different interests, and it's clear that the relationship has run its course, and yet we still struggle with those endings, even if it's time. We may have this feeling of loss over the relationship as it used to be, and to let go of that relationship can feel like we're somehow diminishing the relationship that used to be. And as I was thinking about this, what came to mind was Marie Kondo and her book, The Life-Changing Art of Magic of Tidying Up, and her recent Netflix TV series. And I was thinking about her suggestion to thank your items when you're getting rid of your items, to thank your items for serving their purpose before you get rid of them. And that's a practice that's deeply rooted in Shintoism, a belief that all items have a sort of a soul, have their own thing. And so saying thank you to that item is a way of providing closure and being able to give away. And not to suggest that friends that you've fallen away from are items, and yet But there is something about that, the importance of just expressing your gratitude for what has been, even and perhaps especially when it's run its course. And so we can thank people, and maybe it's more meaningful, I think, if you can do it to the person, but maybe we can just do it for ourselves, to ourselves, for what they've contributed to us, for the good times shared, for how they've helped shape us. All relationships, even the difficult ones, can teach us something, help us grow. Or maybe there's other endings, maybe ones that are a little worse than a drifting away. Maybe it's a toxic relationship that needed to end. Or maybe it's trying to give up an addiction to drinking or drugs or shopping or gambling, codependency. Even these things that we know that don't serve us well, that we know may be hurting us, can be incredibly hard to say goodbye to. And that's not just because of some chemical addiction. There can be a comfort in their familiarity, like an old friend. We shape our identities around these relationships. We only understand ourselves in the context of these relationships. And so it's incredibly important and also incredibly challenging to redefine ourselves outside of the context of that relationship. It's hard work, and it's never truly over. All changes, even the most longed for, have their melancholy, says the French writer Anatole France. For what we leave behind us is a part of ourselves. We must die to one life before we can enter another. That's why it's incredibly important, I think, to have something else to look forward to orient ourselves to another possibility, another way of being, to remind ourselves that every ending is in itself a new beginning. And even the things we may think of as beginnings are also endings, of course. Entering into a new relationship with someone else means the end of being single and the freedom that comes with that. You have to reorient yourself to make compromises, whether to stay in or go out, about household cleanliness, what movie to watch, what time to leave for the airport. That may be a fraught one for some of you. Some of you may be thankfully, blissfully ignorant about that. And to others, it can be a major sticking point. I'm not speaking from experience at all. Or about how to load the dishwasher. About your approach to raising kids. And of course, being parents is one of the other great new beginnings. What greater beginning than a new life entering the world? But it's also a major ending too. The changes are huge, particularly in those first few months and years. Your priorities change, your relationships change, friendships fade away and new ones start. What you do with your free time changes. The idea that you even have free time changes. Your life reorients itself. You can't be as carefree as you once were. And so there's a loss here, there, and yet, of course, there's so much love and joy and wonder of discovering in those relationships with children and new relationships with spouses, significant others. And there may be some grieving for those losses, but that doesn't mean that we don't also deeply love your child or your significant other. We can kind of have that feeling, so I think it's really important to honor those changes. I've been using this image for the service. I really like it because it's not clear to me whether it's a sunrise or a sunset. I love that ambiguity of, where is that road, where is that trail heading towards a sunrise, a sunset, and it speaks to the fact that each ending is a new beginning. And a reminder that while the sun may be setting in one part of the world, it's rising elsewhere. And sometimes when we face these transitions, as we look behind us at what we're leaving behind or forward to what awaits us, we sometimes view one direction or the other with rose-colored glasses, either forward or behind, looking back on a past that was maybe more idealized than reality, forgetting all of the hard times and remembering just the good ones, and seeing nothing but loss ahead. Or sometimes it's the flip of forgetting, of taking for granted the good part of one's life and just always, looking over at what could be and always seeing the grass being greener on the other side. Thinking about all the difficulties that we're leaving behind will stay in the past when we know that many of them follow us to wherever we head. And it's really easy to look at these times of loss, of change, as a time of loss, of what we're leaving behind, of what we're giving up. But the reality is, if you don't pull up roots, then you can't ever have a new adventure. And you might find yourself stuck in those same old ways. And with that, if everything's always the same, life would be boring and unchanging. Sure, of course, there's always much to be lost. And yet there's so much out there that we don't know about, so many possibilities for new adventures, for opportunities for transformation. When I moved to England for school, I didn't know anyone there, which also meant that nobody knew me. And so it was an opportunity for me to redefine myself, unbound by others' expectations, those friends who had known me for years, my parents who had known me for my whole life, and outside of those expectations to grow. And it was a transformative experience for me. Of course, I was still myself, still Matthew, but the possibilities of who I could be and how I could be in relation to other people expanded a lot during that year. And it was great to experience a different culture, a different climate, to get to know an entirely new group of people, to have another section of the world to explore. There are so many wonders in this world to explore. And when I returned back to Long Beach a year later, I had changed. And although being back in Long Beach, I reverted in some ways, in many ways, I was a new person. And I had a similar experience again when I moved to Berkeley to attend Star King School for the Ministry. That one, not only the moving to a new place and developing new relationships and falling in love with a new area, but also just the growth of that opportunity of going to school, of working on yourself, of transforming yourself, of really being born again, a new beginning. And indeed, it was that. I think there's something to this moving to new places. That's why so many people take time to travel or to live in a different place. It reminds me of the opening number from Hamilton. In New York, you can be a new man. A musical about the immigrant experience. And, when you think about immigrants, many of us leave for new experiences, but for so many immigrants, how many actually want to really leave? I think a lot of people leave under challenging circumstances. Who wants to leave their home? It's only when the violence of war or crime or the state becomes too great, or when economic opportunities dry up. It's when being gay puts your life at risk. When you look at the people coming to America who are currently turning themselves in at the border, these people are fleeing countries where their lives are at serious risk, hoping for a new beginning. As the poet Warsan Shire, whose family immigrated from Somalia to England when she was only a baby, writes, "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only leave home when home won't let you stay." And while it's not quite as dramatic, we have several people here at Emerson who are leaving Los Angeles, some people who have already left Los Angeles because of financial reasons. It's just too expensive to live here, especially after retirement. And so there can be a sense of loss about that, having to give up this place you've known as home, and yet, too, in that, in each one of those experiences, there's something to look forward to. Friends or family already in the area, changes to be excited about, new houses being built to your own specifications, new things to explore and new experiences to have. And yet there's always sadness in that leaving behind, of letting go. But I think it's important to remember that no place we have ever left is ever forgotten. Everything we've done, everyone we've met, has shaped us into who we are. And I want to share with you, in the spirit of goodbyes and gratitude for relationships, this poem. It's an excerpt from a poem, Some People by Flavia Wheaton. Some people come into our lives and leave footprints on our hearts, and we are never, ever the same. Some people awaken us to new and deeper realizations, for we gain insight from the passing whisper of their wisdom. Through our lives we are sent, precious souls meant to share our journey, however brief or lasting their stay. They remind us why we're here. Some people come into our lives and they move our souls to sing and make our spirits dance. Some people come into our lives and leave footprints on our hearts. And we are never, ever the same.